Shabbat Shalom, Shana Tova, good morning. It is wonderful to see everyone. The good news is tomorrow the sermon will be shorter. Seriously, for two reasons. Firstly, the intention is never to be overindulgent, but every rabbi knows that on the one day in the year where you're going to see the most members of your community at one time, you address the most important issues facing your community and the Jewish people. So everywhere you go, anywhere you go, today is going to be a longer sermon. Tomorrow, the second reason why tomorrow is going to be shorter is because when we are at Beth El tomorrow in having our own service downstairs, we have been invited, that means all of us together, like, dear Rabbi, come to lunch and bring a whole congregation with you. We've all been invited to lunch at Beth El, and lunch is set for 1 o'clock, believe it or not, so we have to be done sooner. So I'll be speaking for 30 seconds. Don't hold me to it. Okay. On the 15th of May, 1948, my father ran into the house with a newspaper and called, "Zayda, Zayda!" He called to his grandfather, and he sat down and began to translate the English language newspaper to his grandfather, who only spoke Yiddish. "Zayda," my father said excitedly, "yesterday in Palestine, a Jewish state of Israel was born. The first independent Jewish country in the ancient land of Israel, or anywhere else for that matter, in 2,000 years. My great-grandfather sat there quietly, processing, assimilating this information until the first words to leave his mouth were, "So tell me, does it say there what they're going to do when the first Jew kills another Jew?" Some of you might be struck by the reflexive gloom of his response, but if you knew my family of origin, you wouldn't be. Friedrich Nietzsche may be known for having said, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger," but in my family it's more like, "What doesn't kill you will probably come back and try again." In any case, as soon as you've come to terms with this way of thinking, consider, if you will, that at the heart of my great-grandfather's question was quite a profound inquiry into issues of when a Jew suddenly finds themselves in a position of power, how do they treat a wrongdoer who is a fellow Jew? What standards are applied? What will the governance of a Jewish state look like in the modern age? Meaning, how is it going to be run? Would ancient rabbinical thinking be applied? Would civic determinations ranging from decisions about municipal plumbing all the way to the laws applied in a courtroom, would all of this come straight out of the Talmud? Or would modern issues be met with modern responses? Would Israel seek to emulate the standards set by 20th century Western Europe and North America, or the standards of 20th century Middle East, or the standards of first century Babylonia. And if Israel, this new country, didn't follow an authentically Jewish path, then what would make that state Jewish in any case? Well, in 1948, the nascent country's leaders aspired to concoct a unique blend of all of the above, seeking to walk a Jewish tightrope by assuring a place for everyone, for all Jews, no matter what their origin and identity, no matter whether Ashkenazi or Sephardi, whether Caucasian or not, no matter whether religious or secular, and not only for Jews, but for all peoples living there, which was an acknowledgement of the fact that there was already another people within the new state's borders, and that they too were entitled to equal rights. Seeking ways for all of these people to coexist, not to mention a way to meld the ancient with the brand new, the Declaration of Independence for the State of Israel asserted the State of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. It will foster the development of the country for the benefits of all its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace, as envisaged by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture. It will safeguard the holy places of all religions, and it will be faithful to the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. And in their ultimate attempt to favor no single segment of the population over another, Israel's founders intentionally avoided writing a constitution. They were concerned that a constitution stood the risk of having to look in much greater detail and specificity at the state's relationship with any of the groups I've mentioned. Of all the potential social fault lines running through Israel, concerns about disunity, and there were many, were centered on the religious-secular divide from early on. Religious parties argued that the Jewish people already has a constitution, the Torah, while secular Jews were terrified that if the law of the land was to be controlled by rabbis instead of by politicians and judges with degrees from law schools, then Israel would quickly spiral into an illiberal theocracy. So instead, it was decided that the state would be established on three clear principles. Number one, it would be a Jewish nation state, and let's remember back in 1948, the idea of the nation state was still pretty popular throughout the world. Think of India, Pakistan, numerous Arab nations. Number two, this state would be located within the historic land of Israel. And number three, its form of government would be democratic. Had to be democratic. But democratic with a twist. In order to be as inclusive of everyone as possible, the threshold for winning a seat in Parliament was set so low that ever since then, there has never been a single party that has ever won an election outright, because there are just so many tiny parties that manage to win a seat or two. And therefore, the major parties, as many of you know, have always depended on forming coalitions with other parties with which they've had absolutely nothing in common, nothing other than the desire for power. In order to keep these small parties in the coalition, they're often given outsized influence and control, and it may sound undemocratic, but really, if you think about it, it's hyper-democratic. It's too democratic for its own good. It's become unmanageable. For many, though, the saving grace that has brought some sense of stability in this ongoing political chaos has been an independent judiciary which has the power to overrule the excesses that emerge from such a circus of a legislature. So let's return for a moment to my great-grandfather Bezalel and his concerns about what would happen when Jews have power, something that no one alive at the time had ever seen before. What would conflict and disagreement look like within Israel? Because God knows there's been plenty of it, even just amongst Jews, since day one. Despite efforts by both secular and religious leaders, Jews of different persuasions seem to have always had great difficulty validating each other's needs and experiences. I know there's a joke about if you've got X Jews, you've got Y number of opinions. It's an old one. But we're normal. We're a normal, heterogeneous people, and we don't all see things one way. It's healthy. In today's world, we've got a name for it: pluralism, where we make allowances for the fact that my opinion is not the only one out there, your opinion is not the only one out there, and instead we have to find a way to coexist, trying to respect our differences because we understand that what we do have in common, what we share, the things that bind us together are far greater, that they are meaningful. They bring something transcendent into our lives and constantly remind us that we are all, each and every one of us, part of something bigger than just ourselves. We are Israel. The nation's name is the same name as the country. We all are Israel. Among diaspora Jews, too, there has long been a very normative array of opinions and approaches to how to be Jewish, how we should relate to this and to that. We Jews are no strangers to division and differences among our people. Here in the United States, I assume that many of you will have memories of historic rifts between the different Jewish religious denominations, Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, that you might have seen or experienced in your own childhoods, maybe even into your adulthood, the disdain which some Jews have held for other Jews as they've tried to almost claim a monopoly over what is authentically Jewish in our current day and age. And although I didn't grow up here, I didn't grow up in the United States, I didn't experience that atmosphere in its heyday, I get the sense that Jews in America have come a long way in the past few decades, and we generally have a much easier time coexisting today. That we've made great strides at learning how to make room for each other, how to make room for the differences between different Jews. If anything, the sense that I have of a red line in the Jewish community today is with regard to Israel. Where do we stand on certain key issues? It so often seems to me that our mainstream Jewish establishments promote the impression that if one doesn't support or agree with the Israeli government of the day, and especially with right-wing governments, then there cannot be a seat for you at the table. Attitudes towards Israel seem to have become the barometer that many Jews use to decide who is in and who is out, which is totally eschewing the pluralism and the inclusion that we have worked so hard to achieve in other areas of Jewish communal life. In recent months, though, dispute and division in the Jewish world has reached a dangerous and deeply, deeply frightening and troubling level. This time, it's about actually most of the Jewish people, including most Israeli citizens, versus the government of Israel. The government which has been pursuing legislation that directly threatens to undo Israel's democracy, and hence, I fear, the long-term viability and survival of the State of Israel. Matti Friedman, Yossi Klein Halevi, Rabbi Daniel Gordis wrote recently in the Times of Israel, "The political crisis is not just one more Israeli debate over policy, but it's a struggle over the fundamental identity of Israel as a Jewish and a democratic state. A government that won just 48.4% of the popular vote, and which did so only after concealing from the electorate the sweeping nature of its plans, has dared to tamper with the basic identity of the state and has led us into a crisis from which our society might not recover. Vital institutions that require social solidarity, and most importantly, the military, are splintering as Israel's most committed and productive citizens revolt against a leadership that is beyond the moral pale. The high-tech economy that buoyed the notion of the startup nation is beginning to sink and leave the country and divest and put their money and industry elsewhere. State power is shifting from judges to extreme clerics. The voice of fundamentalist religion is emboldened. A year ago, Israel was a regional powerhouse. Within a year, we could be on the road to becoming another failed Middle Eastern state. This unprecedented threat requires unprecedented changes in the diaspora's relationship with Israel. The three authors, Friedman, Halevi, and Gordis, continue. Diaspora support for Israel has traditionally taken the form of support for its government. But now, the greatest threat facing Israel is its government. Jews in the diaspora can no longer support Israel without asking which Israel they are supporting. And they conclude, to treat Israel's present leadership as a normative government is to be complicit in the self-destruction of the Jewish state. Diaspora organizations and leaders who continue to meet politely with government ministers and pose for photographs with the prime minister are failing the Israel that diaspora communities help create. At this fraught moment, Jewish organizations conducting business as usual are placing themselves on the wrong side of history. That's quite the damnation, quite the indictment. My friends, a short 75 years after the establishment of a miracle, of an independent, democratic Jewish state in the historic land of Israel, just a matter of years after the last survivor walked out of the camps. Today, we are witnessing its undoing. We have finally reached the tipping point where the direction the state, by virtue of its government, is taking is vastly at odds with the values of most Jews throughout the world, including most Israelis. Personally, I've been distraught. I have written to you before in our bulletin about the history and the depth of my family's connection with Israel. And yet, as I've said more recently at Shabbat services, I've been at a loss about how to respond. Is this a time for distance, or is it a time for drawing closer? Israel is an inextricable part of the Jewish DNA. Yet if we choose to take a time out of the relationship, is this the way that we would treat any other member of our family whom we adore, yet we can see that they are caught in a downward spiral of self-injurious behavior? Yet if we draw closer, seeking to support and strengthen Israel, how do we do so in a way that makes it clear we are supporting Israeli democracy and not this government? I wonder what my great-grandfather would have said, how he would have reacted, how he would have prognosticated at this junction in Israel and the Jewish people's history. Here's what I think. I think we have to be clear about distinguishing between the country and the people we love and this government, which I believe personally, and you do not have to agree with me, but which I believe is an affront to us all. If you've seen images of the mass protests across the country, attracting hundreds and thousands of people every single week, those groups are made up not of a homogeneous bunch of left-wingers. It's made up of different groups with different opinions, above party politics, not conforming neatly to the divide between left and right, religious and secular. They're all there. They're all there. They're waving the flag and not burning it. And at the end of a rowdy pro-democracy demonstration, silence falls over everyone, and these heartfelt renditions of Hatikva, the national anthem, breaks out. These people are patriots. And so, I think we draw closer. I think we draw closer at this time by making our voices in support of Israeli democracy heard. I think we draw closer at this time by calling Congressman Joe Morelli, our US senators, and letting their officers know that we do not necessarily support this government, yet we still support a strong alliance between Israel and the United States, which is in the interests of both countries. I think we draw closer at this time by telling the leaders of our Jewish institutions here in Rochester that it is important to us, if it is, that they acknowledge what is going on in Israel, and that expression of our beliefs, even an expression of a diversity of beliefs in our community, is both a reflection of our own strength and not weakness, and also a reflection of Israeli democracy itself. Denial of this aspect of Jewish pluralism is an insult. And sadly, it's parallel to supporting the suppression of democracy in Israel. In recent years, when Israel came under attack from outside forces, banners, huge banners in blue and white proclaiming, "We stand with Israel," adorned Jewish communal institutions across this country. Well, now that the greatest existential threat is coming from within, why do we see no banners? Are we too afraid to take a stand? Too afraid what they will think of us? I think we draw closer at this time by seeking recognized institutions in Israel which support democracy, civic life, coexistence, and therefore are deserving of our financial support. Send them a donation if it means enough to you. I've put a list of some suggested organizations. By all means, find other ones that mean something to you. I think we draw closer at this time by going to Israel, spending some time volunteering for these organizations that seek to uplift the entire country. And I think we draw closer at this time by going to Israel, by participating in one of these protests, so that we can experience what it means to fight for Israel's survival in this day and age, live and in the flesh. I don't know what the near or even mid-range future will look like. Neither do I have any sense of how long it will take for the pendulum to swing back in the other direction, away from tyranny, like it almost always does. But what I do know is that these are unprecedented times. And I use that word carefully because I know we've heard it so often over the past few years that we're sick of it. We're sick of hearing 9/11 was unprecedented, Trump was unprecedented, COVID was unprecedented, the state of our planet and global warming is unprecedented. It's enough, dayenu, with all the unprecedenteds. But now, the precipice on which Israel stands, it is unprecedented. And this time, it's not because of what the others are doing to us, but because of what we are doing to ourselves. Israel is and will always be family. Israel is and will always be one of the central pillars of Jewish life. And to paraphrase the words of our teacher, Hillel, if we are not going to stand up and be present for Israel now, then who and what are we? And if not now, well, then what will Israel and indeed the whole Jewish world look like when we come together in this room next year? Am Yisrael Chai. The nation of Israel lives on. Shabbat Shalom and Shana Tova.